All right, let's dig into one of the greatest stories ever told, our own. We're talking about the incredible, frankly, explosive journey of how the human brain became one of the most complex things we know of in the entire universe. It's a story of evolution just slamming its foot on the accelerator. So let's jump right in. The thing that is just mind-boggling about our evolution is this. In what's basically a blink of an eye, geologically speaking, the organ that makes us went through this radical, massive expansion. The big question is, how on earth did that happen? To really get a feel for the scale of this change, just look at the numbers. Our early ancestor, Australopithecus, had a brain floating around 450 cubic centimeters. That's not much bigger than a modern chimp's. Fast forward to us, Homo sapiens, and we're packing around 1,400 cubic centimeters. That is a gigantic leap in our biological hardware. Okay, so to understand the revolution, we've got to go back to the beginning. Our story really starts with our early relatives, the Australopithecines. They give us the crucial starting point for this whole evolutionary epic. And this is where it gets kind of surprising. When scientists looked at the skulls of young Australopithecus individuals, they found that the way their brains grew was, well, pretty much the same as how a modern chimpanzee's brain grows. No real difference. Now, seeing that evidence, it points to a really logical, common-sense idea that's been around for a long time, the extended childhood hypothesis. The idea is simple. To get a bigger brain, our ancestors just evolved a longer period of brain development. We have a longer childhood, so our brains had more years to grow. Makes perfect sense, right? But then, everything gets thrown out the window. About 1 million years ago, a new character shows up on the scene, Homo erectus, and the entire script for our evolution gets a massive rewrite. So the story so far seems simple, doesn't it? The path to a bigger brain was just a longer road. More time equals a bigger brain. Seems obvious. Nope, not even close. That is not what happened at all. See, the secret sauce, the real evolutionary breakthrough, wasn't about adding more time to the clock. It was about cranking up the speed. The actual growth rate of the brain went into absolute overdrive. This was the game changer. Let's just break that down, because this is the whole point. The duration of brain growth, how long it grows for, didn't really change much between us and our ape relatives. The massive difference, the thing that set our ancestors on this entirely new path, was the incredible acceleration in the rate of growth, especially when we were very, very young. Okay, so evolution hits the gas pedal. Our ancestors are now growing these huge, complex brains at an insane speed. But, when you do that, you create a whole new set of problems. Massive engineering problems. How do you physically build, package, and run an organ this complicated without the whole system crashing? So we're shifting gears a bit here. We're going from the why to the how. How was this even physically possible? First, you've got a packaging problem. How do you cram that giant surface of the cortex into a skull? Then you've got the wiring problem. How do you connect billions of neurons so they can talk to each other fast? And on top of all that, the energy problem. How do you fuel this thing? So how did nature, the ultimate engineer, solve this? Well, with two absolutely brilliant tricks. First, cortical folding. You just crumple up the brain's surface, like a piece of paper, to pack a huge surface area into a tiny space. Second, you get really smart about wiring management, paying super close attention to the brain's internal cabling. Let's take a look at that wiring. In a smaller primate brain, you can see the white matter. Think of it as the brain's superhighways. It only makes up about 9% of the volume. Most of the brain, the green matter, is doing local stuff. But now, look at us. It's a completely different picture. Our white matter has ballooned to a whopping 35% of the brain's volume. As brains got bigger, the investment in high-speed, long-distance connections just skyrocketed. We are, truly, a species defined by our connections. And it's really important to remember, our way wasn't the only way to get a big brain. Our closest extinct relatives, the Neanderthals, they show us that there were different blueprints out there for building a powerful mind. So, if you look at Neanderthals, their brains were just as big as ours, sometimes even a little bit bigger on average. They started out with a similar growth spurt as infants. The real difference, the mystery, seems to be in how their brains kept developing after they were born, which suggests there were subtle but really important differences in how their brains were organized. So after this incredible 3 million year sprint, getting bigger, faster, more wired, It all leads to one huge, kind of scary question. Have we peaked? Have we hit a wall? Is there a physical limit to how big our brains can get? And here's the catch. It all comes down to physics. There's a trade-off. A bigger brain gives you more processing power, sure, but it also means signals have to travel further, which takes more time and way more energy. It's like building a bigger city. Yeah, you have more stuff, but it takes forever to get across town. At some point, bigger isn't better. It's just slower. And get this, scientists have actually run the numbers on this. Biophysical models predict that there is a theoretical maximum size for a brain built like ours, a point where it would stop being efficient. And that number is around 3,500 cubic centimeters, roughly 2 to 3 times the size we have now. So when you think about these very real physical limits on wiring, on speed, on energy, you have to wonder, has the crazy, explosive growth that defined our species for millions of years finally hit its ceiling? And if it has, what comes next?